It's just that simple. And very soon, you'll be able to talk not only to Dr. Finch and use them $10 words in his face. You'll be able to talk to Junebug and break it down so he understands it. Okay? You'll be bilingual. Okay? And that's nothing new. Being bilingual is nothing new for us because those of us who work downtown, we do that all the time. Okay?
I just want to say, I'm sorry. I do have a PhD, and I published a book on myth.
Okay.
However, it was from a perspective that the Academy required that I do. An anthropologist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, is very esoteric type thinking, but not this kind of underlying mysticism or cosmology. So I did what I had to do. My real interest was Afro-Hispanic and Afro-Latin, although I'd been in Argentina, had brought back documents by Afro-Argentines published in their newspapers in the 19th century. They wouldn't let me use that for my dissertation. And so I quit. I went to another institution, and the same thing happened there, even though they accepted me with that as my proposal of what I was going to do. Just somehow they didn't want to deal with it because Argentina likes to think of itself as a bit of Europe in Latin America. So on the way, when I located in Baltimore after I was at Harvard, I left there and went to Baltimore and got married. I went to what's called the AUM. It was the Aquarian University of Maryland. These were white people who were reading Masonic information, tarot, and I learned a lot of the terminology of mysticism. I met the Budge books there. So I've come from two different perspectives. One, the academy, where even to do my dissertation, the language was different. It was anthropological. I mean, so anytime you approach a text, you're going to have the challenge of being able to understand it. And it doesn't matter what level of degree you have. It's a matter of exposure and familiarity. So frustration shouldn't enter into the picture. If you use the list, as he's talking about prefixes, suffixes, just the experience itself will expand. The idea is to keep persevering because this information isn't out there for the people who need it, which is all of us. And yes, the academic circles are a little bit caught up on profit, and the students are unhappy. I just read an article yesterday in the newspaper that students are feeling that their interests are not being met despite their tuitions. So education and learning and teaching are all different things. And I think what this class is about, because I heard Dr. Finch at a culturally appropriate lecture, I think they called it, a series at Howard. And I realized that that was what was missing in the work that I had worked on with myth, is that I didn't, although I had approached this stuff somehow through mystical works and other things, like I think it's all coming together for me here. So everybody, irrespective of the formal education, is a learner in life. And we're all about bringing forth whatever our purposes are. I hope to become a link myself, as he said he wants to do, to get the information, transform it, and communicate it in broad ways to a lot of people. So I just say that because it's been a very frustrating journey, and I think that this is a key connection for me.
Well, I'm glad. Now, I want to ask a question. You said that the first group that had to approve your dissertation work didn't approve it.
No, they wouldn't even let me
Is that
work
because
on it.
is that because the topic was not a good topic?
No, it's because the nation of Argentina in Latin America, which is the further south nation in the southern part, denies that they have blacks in their history.
See, that wasn't your problem, though. See, you wanted to do a scholarly work. You prepared to bring all your scholarly attention to it, but for reasons outside of the work itself,
Yes.
they didn't want it exposed.
They didn't want it because it's the national ideology to say that, well, are we really Argentine? Are we really Latin Americans? Because we're Italians, we're Slavs, we're people from, we have people from all around the world. Argentina used to be quite different. Now it's trying to become a part of Latin America. One thing that I do in my teaching is I'm engaged with a lot of the Afro-centric organizations throughout Latin America, which this since like maybe 1992, when constitutions began to change, they became more tolerant of, like the indigenous people, the Indians began to have the Zapatistas. They formed a space for minorities at the margins. And in so doing, African descendants began to say, well, we don't have any space in the nation either. So every country now has, in Argentina and Chile, they have an organization that's linked to UNESCO, that's linked to United Nations. And so I've gotten involved in some of this because I am bilingual, and I've given at Howard on maybe 3 occasions panels where some of these speakers have come. And a lot of people are shocked when they see Afro-Colombians, although I think they know more about Afro-Colombians than they do about Afro-Argentines. But I showed the film and had people ask questions that the narrator, the film was made by Afro-Argentine people. 15 years ago, nobody wanted to be black in Latin America. When I was there before and found the newspapers, I had to hunt them out through talking to people who, they said there are no Afro-Argentines here. Why don't you go to Brazil?
Yeah.
And
and they don't want to be black either.
that's right. They said, oh, they have black people. We don't have them here. And don't bring your racial attitudes from the United States here, because if we had black people, they were happy. That was what they felt. It was nothing but stereotypes. And so when I came back, my professors were from Argentina, because Argentines, you know, they are European and they're very competitive, and they got the jobs. And so they didn't want to touch that topic, but they didn't tell me it that way. They just said, well, I don't really want to work on this. In other words, I don't really know this.
The point is, that was your dissertation. It wasn't theirs.
I know, but the facts are is that they give the stamp. And so consequently, they weren't willing to, they said, well, you can stay here and work on Cervantes or something else, you know, but we're not going to want to do this topic. At that time in my life, being an Aquarian, I said, yeah, I don't need this. I'll do it myself. But I found how hard it is to do things yourself, because you have to have money. You have to, you have to work full time and find the time. And so I kept with that project. And, I've given lots of presentations on it now at academic conferences. And so I'm trying to get my book out, but they didn't like my book, which was Africa in Argentina. I received from one publishing house, changed the title. So I made a compromise. I may do Africa and Argentina last, but and bring out something on black women in Argentina, or in other words, you can't necessarily always confront it the way I had to learn how to become more fluid. So I'm just saying that anything you do is problematic. And
the point I wanted to make was that she was prepared to do first-class work. She couldn't do it because the professors didn't want it done. She mentioned something else too. She said they were not qualified to, in that area, to even be able to judge her. I've told a story here before. Dr. Leo Hansberry, Lorraine Hansberry's uncle, taught at Howard for many years. His personal dream was a PhD from Harvard. He kept writing, asking to be admitted. They kept turning him down. He knew he was qualified. Had a lot of associations with Harvard, non-student associations. Happened to be there one weekend and confronted the president of Harvard University. The president took him aside and said, Dr. Hansberry, I know what you want to ask me, so I'm going to give you the answer. I'm not going to give anybody an answer but you. If you tell people I told you, I'm going to deny it. He said, the reason we have not admitted you to Harvard is because, quite frankly, we don't have anybody qualified to test you. Okay. Now, we do need to move on, though. I've got a lot of books I brought with me today before I get to the actual language. I'm working currently through this book here by Suzar. This is a heavy, heavy book. I'm trying to prepare a lecture that will talk about the many stories in the Bible, the story of Jesus, the story of Israel, the the story of Solomon. Almost all those stories are actually about the movements of the sun. They talk about the birth of something, it's being tied down, seeking to be free from the powers of darkness, its birth time, its ascension. In the case of Jesus, his birth, his baptism by John, his entering Jerusalem. He declines and comes back under the powers of darkness. That's Judas. He dies, is resurrected. It's a cycle. Most of the stories fit a whole cycle, a part of a cycle, and a lot of that is in this book by Suzar. Not an easy book to understand. Dr. Ben Yackerman, Dr. Udoyoye, and Dr. Finch, African Origins of Major World Religions. These books will be here. You may want to, in fact, I'll pass them around. Okay. Brother Kabaz is our expert in the bookstores. Old Testament parallels. I never knew there were parallels. I thought the Old Testament was it. All people had creation stories. Most of the stories follow the same patterns. African origins of major world Western religions. This is by Dr. Ben, Joseph Ben Jacquemin. Sigmund Freud wrote a book. When you look in the library, you can find almost all the books by Sigmund Freud, except this one. Moses and Monotheism. Sigmund Freud, himself Jewish, says if there was a Moses, he was black. Irving, you asked me about these. Part of the workshop I'm working on comes out of these books. The Astrological Foundation of the Christ Myth, volume 1, 2, and 3. Dr. Dakwa teaches in Arkansas. He follows up on the work of Dr. Finch. The Africans wrote the Bible. He does linguistic, he does the same thing Finch does, but he ties it to languages internal to the continent of Africa. And this is another reason we have to do the work. See, the European linguists never did this work because they weren't familiar with the African languages. So therefore, they could not say that Hebrew also is modeled by this language, by, let's say, language of Yoruba, or by the Igbo, because they didn't know the languages.
Pardon me, who's that? Alex Dockham?
His first name is not a Banchi Dakwa. He teaches in Arkansas. Yes.
I took him to Reverend Wilson Church, and
He spoke there. Yeah. This is Naim Akbar, Life from Ancient Africa. He talks about the concept of the soul, the Ka and the Ba coming out of Africa. Foundations of African Thought by Kamalu. Christianity Before Christ by John Jackson. African Origin of Christianity by Boyd. I mean, the stuff is out there. His book by Suzar. This is a heavy book here. This is a heavy book.
Put it down, pick it up. I got it.
Gerald, I'd like to comment. The work that I find that the information you're providing us,
Folks,
I find the information you're providing us helps.
where's the microphone?
Gerald, I just want to say that I find that the green. Okay. Gerald, I want to say that I find that the information that you've been giving us has provided for me a key to understanding Suzar's book.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that book for a while, but taking this information, I find it easier to go in and understand this book.
And understand these are new concepts for us. They come out of a whole different way of thinking. So you're gonna have to let it marinate for a little while. Don't get frustrated because you pick something up and it seems difficult. You know, keep going back to it. You know, and all of a sudden a light will come on. You'll get that part, and then the next part will be a struggle, but you get that part. And after you go on, time and time again, it'll become easier. The first 150 pages of Irugu by Murumani are brutal. But if you can work your way through the first 150 pages, the rest will be a breeze. But you gotta get your mind tuned up. Again, she's an anthropologist, and she's using anthropological methodology and anthropological language. You got to get used to that. And the way you get used to it by reading it over and over again. Knowledge comes by hearing. You know. Yes, sir.
I'm going to pass it to Carl, but I just want to make one comment about the value of your work. If you look at what's taking place, and this goes back to what you said earlier about those of us in here taking the information and passing it on. Right now, I think this is a critical time. If you look at the Left Behind series by LaHaye, speaking of Jesus returning, this kind of information I think can help us to understand and pass on to family and friends in terms of what is it when you talk about Jesus and what is this about returning. So I just wanted to
And what's the end of the age mean?
yeah. Oh, and there's eschatology comes in.
It could be that somebody else's age is ending and ours is beginning.
Yeah.
It might be something to applaud rather be scared of. Come.
I was going to comment on something else that you said, but I just forgot that you just said. But prior to his comment, I wanted to speak to something earlier that the sister was saying about Latin America, and I too lived down there about 14 years ago in Panama, and it's the same thing. I mean, and then I had a chance to visit Costa Rica and Nicaragua, and I was just shocked to see all those. I mean, they were black people. There was no question. And even now, when I talk to people here about it, they were like, "Well, did they look black?" They don't really get the concept that there are actually black folks in other parts of the world other than Africa, other than the United States. Because my concept was coming from here, young kid, was that if I saw black people, then they must be from America. So I would come up to them, because I was thinking, well, this is a Latin country, so I go up and speak to them. And of course, they don't speak English, So it was just, but that speaks to the framing of information too, and I think the perception that we have is even more stronger than the reality, because my perception was so skewed of Latin America. I didn't understand that Latin necessarily wasn't a racial thing as much as it was a cultural thing, and that also that white people brought Africans to different parts of the world. We were colonized by the English, whereas they were enslaved by the Spanish and by the Portuguese and Brazil and other places like that, and the Dutch as well. So I mean, just that alone, the things that we're talking about in here, most these things should be basic, but most people don't get that because of the miseducation.
Yeah, it can be real simple things. I went to a Mexican country during the Watergate hearings. My mind's blocking now exactly which one it was. And I'd walk downtown between noon and 2 o'clock because that's when everybody took a siesta.
Which country? I missed what you were saying.
I'm forgetting where I went.
Somewhere in Latin America.
It's in Mexico, on the western coast of Mexico.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't. It's a famous resort, but I can't think.
Oh, Cancun?
Cancun's on the eastern coast. Is on the eastern coast. This is the western coast. No, but anyway, I'd walk down Acapulco. I'd walk downtown between 12 and 2 o'clock because everything was closed down for siesta. This one fellow be standing out there every day. He said, "¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa?" And I said, "How you doing?" It took me all week to realize he was saying, "What's happening?" No. The last day was I said, "What's happening, bro?" He gave me some that. Again, we said, tell your kids right now to pick up French or Spanish. Half the black folks in the world speak French.
Yes, I know.
Other half speak Spanish. Yes.
It's like when I went to St. Martin, I started going to nursing conferences around, Jamaica. But when I went to the Virgin Islands, and what you need to do is just do a little traveling. When I went to St. Martin and St. Martinique, half of it, you have the Dutch side and the French. And I was just fascinated that these were blacks and they just spoke nothing but French, and you go right across the road and they're speaking Dutch. And I just wanted to know what they were doing, how they were doing, their eating habits, but these were blacks. And just to go just that short distance show you. And if you can take young people and educate them to see their own, and to know everybody around the world do not speak English, it will broaden their horizon and understand, and helping them understand who and what they are.
You want it?
Earlier, Asagai, you were reading out of chapter 4, Echoes of the Old Dark Land on
Yes.
page 129. And you kind of went fast over this part where Finch says, Gerald Massey in 36 years of mind-bending labor. And that's tying into what we're talking about. That is, your mind's going to be bent by getting new vocabulary, going into sciences you didn't know existed, going into other lands, as the sister just mentioned. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work that goes into this field of study. That's what this is, a
Yeah.
field of study.
Decoding cultural things that don't make sense at first, and then become perfectly obvious why they do things the way they're doing them. I want to get back to the religio, linguistic connection between Judaism and Egypt. What I want to show is that out of the chapter Finch has here, is that there's a connection even between what we thought was Judaism and the names used for the various characters coming out of Egypt. Picture this. If we take the story out of the Bible, 70 nomadic people move into Egypt. That's like 70 Vietnamese or folks from the backwoods of the Amazon coming to New York City, one of the most cosmopolitan, advanced cities on the face of the earth. Within a generation, those folks have become New Yorkers. They think like New Yorkers, they speak like New Yorkers. Within 2 generations, some of the kids have no memory of the fact that they were never anything else but New Yorkers. That's the same situation that happens here. 70 folks come into Egypt, the most advanced civilization on the face of the earth at that time, and what becomes their religion and even their terminology is affected by the culture in which they find themselves. So what Finch does now, he goes back and looks at the Kemetic stems, the stems of the words, and shows that the stems of the words themselves, put that in there, please. The stems of the words themselves can be decoded, much like the term mafia. That's a word in English, but it's mafia, my family, in Italian. Hezbollah, the group over in Lebanon. That's Hezbollah, the party of God. So it's a phrase in Arabic, it's a word in English. Same thing with mafia. Well, the same thing happens with Kemet and the Egyptian language and with Judaism, modern day Judaism. And that's not going to work on me. He takes the name Adam. That's the Hebrew English equivalent. He looks at the characteristics of what Adam is supposed to be. Can everybody see that? Let me turn the light off. Adam is the father of mankind. He's the first man in the image of God. He's the completion of creation, and he's made last. He's the namer of all creatures. And in the Old Testament, that includes woman. He names her like he names the horses and the pigs. That same stem translates to Atum, A-T-M, in the Egyptian, the Kemetic. And Atum has a meaning. The meaning is father of mankind, first God in the image of man. The root TM means completion. And the cognate, the other way of writing that, T's and D's are irreversible. The cognate, DM, means to name. So in the name Adam, or Atum, A-T-M, in the Kemetic language, no vowels in the Kemetic language. And this is the English version of Hebrew, which put vowels in so we can pronounce it. You've got similarity here between the name in English, Adam, out of the Hebrew, and Atum, out of the Kemetic, where the word Atum actually describes the character that we know as Adam. He does this for some 20 or 30 different words. I have not included all of them here, but I wanted to include enough of them that we could see. Okay. Which little girl?
A little girl in New York who wrote the poems about.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was a girl? Okay.
She's on the radio.
Yeah.
You give him the microphone.
Oh, this is,
'Cause some folks know what you're talking about.
the little girl who. The little 7-year-old sister in New York who wrote the poems condemning, rightfully condemning Christopher Columbus and what was it, Darwin, as what she call them, terrorists. Yeah. In some of her poems, her name was Autumn, and she was she's been featured on television shows and stuff. And apparently this happened last month, but somehow it's becoming a news story now, a month later, because people want her to be condemned. Some people.
Now, this is the case where black folks can make a difference. You know, if a group of black folks rose up right now and said, she's correct. And all they would have to do is what I did in my first class here. Show the maps of the voyages of Christopher Columbus. You can see from the maps, he never touched North America or South America. Then you follow up by saying, and that's why, boys and girls, it's not named after him. At that point, the argument's over. Okay. The name Eve, Hawa, in the Hebrew, goes back to Hefa or Hiwa in the Kemetic. She was suborned by the serpent. She was fooled by the serpent. And she plucks the fruit of the tree. Now, the word Hefa in the Kemetic is the great mother serpent. And Hiwa means fruit. So once again, in the name itself are the elements that describe who the character is. A name in the Kemetic language gets transferred over to a character in the Hebrew. The Western side not to work right now. Eden, E-D-E-N or A-N-D, and then the cognate is D-N and D-E-N. The parasitic garden of Genesis represented of the great enclosure in religious motifs. The cognate D-N means enclosure. So again, the Kemetic word describes the Hebrew word that we all have become familiar with. The land of Nod, N-O-D or N-W-D from the Hebrew, N-U-D from the Kemetic. Nod is the land east of Eden where Adam and Eve settled when they're driven out of the Garden of Eden. The Kemetic term, N-U-D, means outside or away from. Now, 3 of these would be enough to convince me, but he goes on and on and on. Cain, Cain in the Hebrew, K-Q-N or Q-E-N in the Kemetic. He strikes down his brother Abel in the first murder. Q-E-N means to strike down. Now, of course, this takes somebody, of course, who's taking the time to go back and study the ancient Egyptian language. You don't do that, you can't make this connection. As with Dr. Daqua, if you don't know the languages from the interior African countries, once again, you can't make any linguistic connection between those languages and the Egyptian, and again show the basis of the Old Testament is purely African, which is something that, imagine that. A black man wrote a book, I got it at home, he finds 4 or 5 black people in the Bible. Cain Feld, I think, found one in Troubling Biblical Waters. His book troubled me because everybody in the Bible was black. To get to Luke. See, think what that would do to our people to understand that. As religious as we're trying to be, and as right as we're trying to be, we're worshiping somebody else's ancestors. And as Patrice Maldomo Somé says, while our ancestors stand on the unemployment line. Abel, or Habel in the Hebrew, Habir in the Kemetic. Abel makes a food offering of a lamb to God and is killed by Cain. Hob means feast. Ear means right. So Habir is thus a ritual feast. So the term describes the character that we know as Abel. Noah, Nuach in the Hebrew, Nuach or Nuh in the Kemetic. Noah survives the flood, is the master of the flood. He's the master cultivator as a grower of grapes. He imbibes and becomes drunk from wine. Nu is the great flood of heaven and earth. Remember that everything comes out of the Nu. Ak means garden or irrigated fields. This means, Nuh means drunkenness. So Nuach is the flood irrigating the fields, and it's associated in some way with drunkenness. The story of Noah, of course, and his drunkenness is, make sure I'm not confused now. It's Noah or Jacob. Chris or Ham, help me out. Who gets drunk? Noah, okay, that's right. Okay. Noah gets drunk. Chris or Ham, for those of you who are not familiar with Chris or Ham. Noah gets drunk, falls out naked in his tent. His son comes in, sees his dad butt naked, laid out on the floor, covers him up. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Goes and tells his two brothers. They put a covering over their shoulders, and they walk backwards so they won't see him naked and throw it down on him. Noah wakes up, finds himself, probably by the time half covered, realizes that he fell out drunk, goes out, gets mad, and curses Canaan's son, Ham. Now, you know, racism is based upon stupidity. Most of the people who preach for years about us being cursed had never even read enough of the story to realize it don't make no sense. The origin of it is somebody who's drunk, who wakes up with a bad head. And we all know folk who wake up with bad heads. You know, everything happens after that is downhill. You know. Another point too. This is why we must, again, why we must study, because just as people can pass around incorrect information, we can pass around correct information. There were times when Africa was first discovered as a continent by white folks that learned people stood up in public gatherings and said that Africans had tails. Up until the Second World War, there are stories about the Germans, you know, when they would capture some black people, first thing they wanted to do was take the clothes off and see if they had a tail.
The German guy told me that.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah. Learned people stood up and told people that there were dragons in Africa and all kinds of wild beasts. They'd never been to Africa. They were quoting somebody else who was supposed to be an expert. Some of whom had been there, some who hadn't been there. You know, a lot of what we've been taught is misinformation.